Welcome to Charlotte, North Carolina, the largest city in the Tar Heel State. Charlotte is also one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country, having tripled, yes, tripled in population since just 2000, from 768,000 people to nearly 2.4 million. And Charlotte City proper is actually nearly doubled since then too, from around 500,000 to over 900,000 today. With Charlotte being a well-established financial hub, and now rising healthcare, manufacturing, tech, and even aerospace sectors, it feels like Charlotte has an infinite growth glitch and everyone is moving here. Just walking or driving around the city, and you can easily feel this, with new builds and construction just everywhere you look. And even though Charlotte is infamous for its car-centric sprawl and lack of urbanism, there is one area that is certainly breaking that stereotype: South End. South End, as its name suggests, is the neighborhood directly southwest of uptown Charlotte. Yes, uptown, not downtown. Even the smallest slip of the tongue in this regard, if you're caught, will land you years behind bars. And as you can see from just a satellite view, there is a narrow high-density corridor that starts from I-277. It makes its way southwest, and the reason for this is twofold. Firstly, as is the case for many of the newly developed urbanist neighborhoods around the country, these blocks that now have brand new high-density apartment buildings and townhomes was an industrial area that was able to be converted into a dense neighborhood without having to tear down too many single-family homes. And the second is the Lynx Blue Line, Charlotte's one and only light rail line that connects nearby residents directly into uptown without the need to drive. And so South End is Charlotte's major and very grand attempt at transit-oriented development. Now from here, what I usually would do is list the projects that have been recently completed and then break down what's under construction and what is proposed for the future. But this week, I actually had the amazing opportunity of being able to film around South End and truly see it for myself. So while a classic Charlotte Rising Cities type video is certainly on the cards for some point in the future, today I thought I'd present you guys my pedestrian experience of South End Charlotte and seeing what it's really like beyond the renderings and numbers. And of course, give my honest take. So sit back, relax, and let's see what Charlotte's most exciting district is really about. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the video, be sure to drop a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Let's start with the positives because there are a lot. Most of the buildings are actually very beautiful and execute mixed use really well. Some are certainly better than others, and a couple of the buildings I'm definitely not a fan of, but the vast majority actually incorporate a lot of classical design and are very appropriate for this region of the country, as well as this district's industrial past, between the great brickwork seen in most buildings, as well as even some southern vernacular. And the commercial spaces are frequent enough where most amenities are a close enough walk away from most people's front doors or apartment buildings, and connect well with the street. There is this one building where, even though there are still mixed-use retail spaces, they essentially function the same way as if they were a part of a mini-mall, as they're off the street and instead face the surface parking lot, whereas ideally, for the sake of the pedestrian experience, you'd want the retail to be accessible via the street and the parking to be hidden in the back. But thankfully, this is an exception, and most buildings actually follow the ideal formula, with there also being some single-use retail buildings as well, which is perfectly fine as they're usually right to the street and are repurposing the old industrial buildings in a clever way, and in a way that leaves plenty of room for development around it. Like here, for example. Another major positive is how wide and pedestrian-friendly the sidewalks are. I mean, look at this. This is at least 2 or 3 times wider than most of the sidewalks you'll see on a commercial corridor in LA. And as a bonus, there's also a frequent amount of public plazas and places to sit and hang out, even if the surrounding scenery is just a parking lot. And even the streetlights are really nice around here with a classical design. By far the highlight of the South End is the actual light rail corridor. The stretch, for the most part, is lined with pedestrian pathways on either side and is therefore a hotspot for joggers and dog walkers, and even more impressively, you'll get entrances to apartment buildings, townhomes, patios, and even storefronts, such as this great little acai bowl place where I just couldn't help myself. And of course, the train going by just never gets old. But South End, despite how good and popular it is, definitely has its problems that, as it continues to grow and expand, and there is a lot of potential for expansion still, can hopefully take into account in order to maximize all the development that's taking place here. Firstly, I have some concerns about the height of some of these projects, such as the recently completed 24-story Linea Charlotte. While I understand why all of my YIMByists out there are fully supportive of going vertical and are all for residential high-rises, there are some things to take into account. Of course, density is important, but I'd argue that beyond 7 or 8 stories, the livability of places tends to go down as the buildings are just too out of scale and become unreadable, as Michael Diamant would put it, past a certain height. But also, I would even argue more importantly that there are so many plots that are yet to be developed that by building these super tall projects with several hundred units, South End risks fulfilling its housing demands before all these gaps are filled in. And while that may seem like a ridiculous concept, this is a problem going on in Austin, Texas right now. A lot of people probably don't know this, but after a decade of Austin being one of, if not the most booming city in America, suddenly Austin, specifically Austin City Center, is losing people. And with that, the up-and-coming urban neighborhoods around Austin, akin to South End in Charlotte, that built as vertically as they were able to, will now have these undeveloped plots that instead of being snatched up by developers in quick fashion, like what may have been predicted, will instead be left untouched for the foreseeable future. And in the meantime, these blemishes stick out like sore thumbs and severely detract from the perceived quality of the neighborhood, as with it comes the lack of enclosure that makes classical cities so great. You actually see examples of this in South End. Take this 12-story apartment building that's across the street from this. This feels rather incomplete, but just down the street you have this block with 2 opposing 6-story developments, and yet it makes such a substantial difference. It makes this the perfect location for this local dumpling shop. Here's another great example of this. You'd rather have the residential units spread out in a way that actually makes for great neighborhoods, not just cool individual skyscrapers. This, by the way, is one of the key reasons why the light rail corridor is such a success, because it's properly lined up on both sides with buildings at a good height and almost every plot is filled. Enclosure is what makes places feel pleasant and comfortable, while open spaces feel like wilderness. It's literally in our DNA to perceive our surroundings this way. And it's not to say that what's happening in Austin will eventually happen to Charlotte, but perhaps building with the long term in mind is the wiser approach to avoid risking such a problem from occurring here too. This is also why I hope that large gaps that are sometimes between projects are minimized, because they also can disrupt the urban experience. And if there are going to be gaps between buildings, they should at least provide public pedestrian pathways, because another slight problem with South End is that some of the blocks are just too large for pedestrians to traverse, and that there aren't any pedestrian bridges or tunnels to cross over or under the rail line. For example, if you happen to live in this apartment building and want to get some quick groceries at Publix, which is literally less than 0.2 miles away, because of the large blocks and lack of crossings, this should-be 2-minute walk just became a 16-minute journey. And now, you're going to drive. Or what happens when you live at the Penrose and want to walk to get some sushi here? Well, instead of there being a convenient pedestrian path that splits this large block in half and makes this once again an under 2-minute walk, you have to go all the way around, and suddenly it's 8 minutes. Which for some people isn't a big deal, but for those who are elderly or with disabilities, this can become a deal breaker, but can easily be solved. And this leads into the last concern, which is that there's still too much emphasis on cars over pedestrians. Even a lot of the newer builds that have extensive surface parking lots that make it more difficult for pedestrians, as well as setbacks that, while having nice foliage, are also clearly designed with cars in mind and wasting valuable space. And while it's understandable that South Boulevard is a heavy traffic road for cars that serves as a major artery for the city, when it comes to the side streets that are meant to be neighborhood streets, while they are much narrower and quieter, which is great, there could also be more implementation of traffic calming devices, such as speed bumps, as some of these cars on these narrow roads will still whiz by, curb extensions to slow down cars as they turn, and also make pedestrians feel safer as they cross the street with increased visibility and a shorter crossing distance, which South End actually does have, just not often enough. It would also be nice if there were more traffic signals, and to specifically not allow right on reds or when a pedestrian is crossing, to avoid a situation like this one that I caught, where a car continues to inch forward on a woman with a stroller. There is also a lot of talk going on in Charlotte right now to get rid of parking minimums, and this could be a major step in making South End even better. Firstly, it means developments don't have to be so large, as right now, so much space is having to be dedicated to parking, which in turn will mean that construction costs for developers will go way down without having to pay for these spaces in garages. meaning you'll see more affordable units and less luxury projects, and also less of a need to build these high-rises, as having less units will now be a more profitable option. You'll start getting smaller projects like this that neatly fill in small gaps, and therefore will help make the neighborhood more aesthetically diverse, open up the possibility for smaller and less corporate developers, while also making it more possible for every property to actually be developed, as once again, even one left behind can have a major effect, and sometimes some of these smaller, more awkward plots take the longest to be developed due to their limited space, and without parking minimums, that really will help these things out. But don't take this the wrong way at all. South End Charlotte is truly great. The buildings are mostly very aesthetic, even by my standards, and in moments can be quite beautiful. There are lots of pedestrians out and about. Even in the middle of the work week, there's an abundance of excellent mixed-use spaces and public plazas that make living here without a car entirely possible. And of course, all this is centered around the light rail line that in a quick trip takes you straight into Uptown. It really hits the mark and is a prime example of good American urbanism done on a large scale. With South End only continuing to grow at a rapid rate and presumably only get better and better, I think it's time for urbanists to place Charlotte higher up on their radar. Please let me know down below what other cities or districts I should check out. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. And now a shout out to my incredible supporters on Patreon: Sven Weisbrod, Guy Courtois, Grandpa Allen, Jean Baptista, Ruben Hansen, James Whale, Michael Goldman, Ulysses Arnold, Ehsan Mirza, Joseph, Roach, Eric Martz, Fortunate Calf, VJ Mari, Jerome Frolich, Glenn Myers, and my dad.